So in this final video, I'm just going to show you how you present the results of a logistic regression model in a word table. The table itself is actually very straightforward. It's more straightforward than preparing a table for the results of a cross tabulation. So first of all, just to highlight the figures that you're reporting in this table, you're only recording one column of data. And the column of figures that you're going to be reporting is the final column. The column that's headed in the SPSS outlook, the exponential or the EXP of the beta coefficient. That is the odds ratio. Okay, statistically, it might be referred to as the exponential of the beta. But if we're preparing a table for people who maybe don't have much understanding of stats, we don't want to confuse them by giving it that heading. So I'm going to label this column odds ratios because that's what we're reporting. It might not be the notation that SPSS uses, but that's the notation that we're going to use for actually putting together a table. So the the column of figures here, that is simply the last row of the last column of numbers in your table, the table variables in the equation. So that's really, really straightforward. You just need to copy the last column of numbers. In some ways, it's the other bits of information that you have to spend a little bit more time thinking about. I'm going to start off with having a table heading. You need to have a very clear table that explains to the reader what this model is actually doing, because you're not going to understand the odds ratios without actually knowing how the model has been set up. So I've called this table, I've just called it table 1, but your table number will vary according to the number of tables in your assignment. But I've called it the Logistic Regression Model of Views on Climate Change because that's what it is. But then I've actually explained how the odds ratios are modelling views on climate change. Now, if you remember, I switched around the views on climate change. So how I've set it up is that the odds ratios are measuring or are looking at the odds ratios of not believing in climate change, or that climate change is due to human activity, compared to believing that climate change is due to human activity. So I've stated there how my odds ratios are working. I know some of you might have the climate change models and variables recoded the other way. So you might be looking at the odds of believing in climate change is happening due to human activity, compared to believing that it isn't happening due to human activity or that climate change isn't happening. But I've just been quite clear how my odds ratios are set up. And in the first column, I have the variables in the model. And here you cannot rely on the SPSS output, because the SPSS output just gives the internal coding that it has used, and it doesn't make any sense unless you also have the internal coding. So we just have to explain to the reader how the variables, how the independent of the variables or the covariates have been fitted into the model. So as you can see, for each variable, I have at least 2 rows of data. In my first row, so we're looking at gender here, so the variable is gender, and then I give the reference category. So the reference is male, and then in the row below, I have female, and that's where I have the odds ratios. I have no odds ratios for men because they're the reference category. Strictly speaking, if it's a binary variable like this, you don't need the reference category, but I'm just going to keep things a little bit simpler and suggest that you report all variables in the same way, regardless of whether they're binary or whether they have 3 or more categories. My next variable is interest in politics, so then I state what the reference is, a great deal or quite a lot. And then below that, I have the other category, which is some or no interest. And I have the odds ratios here. For age group, In my model, the reference category was 18 to 24, and then I had two categories, 25 to 54. So that's the odds ratios for that category, and then 55 and over. Highest qualification, reference is A-level degree. So the odds ratios are for people with GCSEs or no qualifications. Occupational class, reference professional managerial, the odds ratios were those not professional or managerial. And finally, political party, the reference was Conservative. So my odds ratios are for Labour, Liberal Democrat or Green, or no political affiliation. The one last thing I need to explain to you is how we indicate significance. You will see that 3 of my odds ratios here, I've done a couple of things to them. First of all, I put them in bold, and secondly, I put 2 stars against them. These are my significant variables in the model. It's just these 3 odds ratios here. These are the only ones that are significant. So just to make them stand out, I've bolded them, but I've also indicated the significance. And this is the convention, how we report significance for a model. You see, I put 2 stars next to each of these variables. And at the bottom, I've got the notation of what that means. 2 stars means significant at 95% level. You can also see here, I've written 1 star significance at 90% level. Now, I don't have any 1 stars because I don't have any odds ratios that were only significant at 90% level. But if I did have one that was 90% significant, that was significant at 90% level, I would just put 1 star next to it. So you do not have to report the actual values for significant. You only have to report whether each of these odds ratios, whether they're significant at a 95% level. And that's how we do it. If you have an odds ratio that's significant at a 95% level, you just put 2 stars next to it, and at the bottom, a little note at the bottom that says 2 stars significant at 95% level. And I just find it easy just to bold the ones that are significant. It's just easier for a viewer, for a reader, to actually see which of the variables that turn out to be significant. So that's simple. It's really very straightforward. To report the output, you just need the odds ratios. The one thing you do need to do is explain a little bit more about how the covariates or the independent variables have been coded to fit in the model. So you need to spend a little bit more time in detailing what your variables are, and you also need to make clear that you have a very clear title for your table.